All right, so I'm Thane Bukowski, and this is the Bukowski Long-Term Athletic Development Model. And it's important to remember that this is for team sports, so late specialization sports, not early specialization sports and individualized sports. So an introduction, practice early, practice often. It's something that should be ingrained into our athletes as soon as possible. So to really develop a skill set, you have to practice it. So you need to practice that skill early, and you need to practice it often and be consistent with it. That's how you're going to develop those skills. So somebody I want to bring up is Allen Iverson. So Allen Iverson is one of the best combo guards in the NBA of all time. So he was famous for an interview where he talked about practice and how he didn't want to practice and he gives his heart out in the game. But what he didn't realize is that when he was growing up, he may not have liked practice, but every time he was out there playing on the blacktop, playing pickup games, he was always practicing. And he might not have realized that, but that's the basis of how a long-term athletic development model should feel. It should feel fun. You should want to do it. You should want to get better, but it shouldn't feel like practice that you're being forced to do. So a team sport athlete. So an athlete definition for team sports. So a high visual motor integration skills while moving at high velocities for their sport, while also having the physiological capabilities to perform. So high visual motor integration skills. So that's taking something from the visual field and processing it and having a coordinated motor response. So that's important in skills like football or basketball where you're moving at those high velocities and you have to catch the ball, or baseball where you're in the hole and have to make a throw. So I'll show you some clips of what I think is a good team sport athlete. And then speaking about the physiological capabilities, so that's things like strength, power, speed, endurance, things of that nature where you're developing a little bit different qualities. So these have to combine together in order to make a great athlete. And I'll show you a couple clips of what I consider to be great team sport athletes. So here's the first one, Odell Beckham Jr.
He's the running back. Play action. And Manning's going to heave one. There's a foot.
So great catch. High visual motor integration, sees the ball, adjusts to it while running with those physiological capabilities. He gets off, runs down the field, has a guy hanging on him, makes an adjustment to the ball, and goes up and catches it. That's a great athlete right there. Number two.
And toward the hole, Jeter backhands from the outfield pass.
This is a great Derek Jeter play. The jump throw made famous by him. Has to react to the ball off the bat, make a physiological move to go, make a quick move to go and field that ball in the hole, jump, and have the strength and power to make that throw over, and the accuracy and hand-eye coordination to make that throw to first base and an accurate throw to get the guy out.
Playing at a pace like this and continue to take the shots they take. 13
And then the final one is LeBron James. Obviously a great athlete, has a lot of physiological capabilities, jumps higher than everybody, runs as fast as anybody, he's tall, athletic. But what a lot of people don't realize is that he's such a skilled basketball player in terms of dribbling, passing, his vision, and all of that plays a role in what makes him one of the greatest athletes of all time. So now going back to the PowerPoint, those are some great team sport athletes, and they fit the definition of a great team sport athlete. So current long-term athletic development model I want to talk about is the gold standard kind of for late specialization, so mainly team sports. This is by Balii and Hamilton in 2004. So it's necessary, something we all can agree on is that a long-term athletic development model is necessary to excel at a sport. A lot of the times, you're not just going to see people that just randomly pick up sports and are great at them. So this model mainly talks about the physiological development. So aerobic, endurance, anaerobic performance, strength, power, speed, etc. And what they use to really base what ages they should develop these qualities at is peak height velocity. So this is kind of around puberty. It's the greatest rate of height growth at a specific time. So everybody knows when you hit that growth spurt, that's the greatest accelerated rate of height velocity. So that's kind of what they base it off of, because that shows when those hormones and that maturity is starting to happen. So it's the time that they base when to develop those physiological qualities off of. So there's 6 stages in this model. The fundamental stage, learning to train, training to train, training to compete, training to win, and then the retirement stage. And I'll give a little brief explanation of each of them next. And this is just a long-term athletic development model picture done by Belii, and it just kind of shows when each stage is kind of relevant. And it's a little different, obviously, because this is chronological age, and we talked about the developmental age and peak height velocity, but this is just a good basis of when you can develop each of these training stages. So the fundamental stage, this is about having fun. So developing basic motor skills, having fun. Males ages 6 to 9, females 6 to 8. It's not sport specific yet, but it's developing those general movement patterns with structured gameplay, and that allows for coordination, balance, speed, and agility. The learning to train stage. So ages male 9 to 12, females 8 to 11. So kind of pre-puberty. He thinks this is an accelerated rate of development for motor coordination. So developing those hand-eye coordination skills. For strength exercises, he wants to keep it body weight and adding in some low intensity plows like hops and jumps. And in this stage, there'll be a 70 to 30 training to competition ratio. So 70% practice and training and 30% competition. The training to train stage. This will be for males aged 12 to 16, females 11 to 15. So this is kind of when they start to hit puberty and after puberty. So in this time, he thinks there's an accelerated growth for aerobic endurance and strength training based on those hormones and the maturity of the nervous system. And this, again, is based off of that peak height velocity. That's how he utilizes when to train these specific qualities. This stage will be a 60 to 40 training to competition ratio. So a little less training, a little more competition, but still more training overall. And he says that the learning to train and the training to train periods are key periods for athletic development, because this is pre-puberty when we can develop a lot of those skills. And I'll get into the basis of why we should develop as many skills as possible pre-puberty in the upcoming slides. So training to compete, this will be males age 16 to 18, females 15 to 17. So kind of late high school. This will be for using the developed skills in competition. So skill refinement, using the skills that you have and using them to compete. So 50 to 50 training to competition ratio. So even training and even competition. And this is when you want to develop that competitive skill set to really compete at later stages as you move on in your athletic career. And then training to win. So males aged greater than 18 and females greater than 17. So the rest of your athletic career, from late high school, college, and professional if you make it. So in this stage, they want to maximize developed skills and physiology, looking to really develop those into collegiate athletes and be great competitors at that time frame. And then this will be a 25 to 75 training to competition ratio. So it's really focused on competing and winning games. And then the final stage will be the retirement stage. So the athlete has finished competing. They're transitioning into coaching and using the learned skill set that they developed over their athletic career to develop future young athletes. So my critique of the current long-term athletic development model, I think they're missing a critical period for motor development from 0 to 6. I'll talk about how this is an important time period to develop hand-eye coordination that will transfer over to sports skills at a later age. And I think they're missing out on this period. I think it's a little too much based on physiological development like speed, strength, power, and endurance, and they need to focus more on developing sport skills and coordination, which obviously we mentioned, but it was kind of just briefly mentioned in there, and I think they need to focus on it a lot more than they did in this model. And then they talk about these physiological development, but there's no true periodized strength and conditioning program to actually develop these qualities. So how do parents know what to actually do? Parents and coaches know what to actually do to develop speed, strength, power. They know when to develop it, but they don't have the necessary knowledge to actually go and provide training interventions that can develop those physiological capabilities. And this is the same thing with developing sports skills. There's no description of specific structured play or practice. It just mentions, oh, this is how play or practice should be at this time. But it doesn't tell us how to actually develop those skills. And I think that's one thing that they're mainly missing is the how of to develop those physiological capabilities and those sports skills. So this is a good introduction into Bukowski's long-term athletic development model. So this will be a holistic periodized program. So there'll be training interventions from infancy throughout high school and into college and professional. So this will be for sports skills, specific guidelines for play and performance, or play and sports, specific drills and games to improve coordination and develop skills related to sport. And again, this isn't meant to be the normal, typical practice where everything is forced upon the kids. This is meant to be fun, and it's just giving them a training intervention to where they're developing the skills and having fun. It's not, oh, I'm forcing my kid to go do this. It's not about forcing the kids to do it for your sake. It's about having fun and having them develop into athletes while playing sports. And this will be the same thing for strength and conditioning. This will be a periodized program to develop physiological qualities to keep the athlete healthy, mainly overall, and to develop to play at a high level. So we want to keep the athlete healthy. That's the main goal of a strength and conditioning program. And then eventually, as we get into those older stages, that's when we really want to develop our physiology, get faster, jump higher. But the main thing is to utilize strength and conditioning to keep the athlete healthy throughout their athletic career. So one thing we need to focus on is we need to start working on skills when the central nervous system allows them to be developed. So we don't want to wait to later stages. It should be developed when the central nervous system allows those skills to be developed, when they have the capability to do that and the maturity to do that. And then we continue to refine those skills by constantly pushing the envelope of what skills can be developed after we have this base set of skills that we've developed over these training interventions. So some examples of the Bukowski long-term athletic development model. So like I mentioned, in this model, we want to emphasize what skill, why the skill at that time, and how it transfers. But what the main focus is how to develop that actual skill with training interventions and a periodized program. And it's going to show, it won't be anything spectacular in a specific section, but what's important about it is that this is a periodized model of skills built up upon each other over this long-term period. And that's what's going to make our model even better than the current models. And it'll explain how to actually develop those skills with practice and training interventions. So these descriptions will be given throughout every major period. So different age groups will tell you how to develop specific skills at that time, what to do for strength and conditioning, how to keep the athlete healthy, all that kind of things. So for example, for a 4 to 5-year-old, a sports skill and a physiological capability that we can develop at that time. So catching. A training intervention where the parent practices specific qualities with the child that gets more difficult over time. So just basic things that we can go play outside with our child, or if we're coaching them at this young age, but mainly for parents, you could use start off with a bigger ball, and as they get better at catching the big ball, work to a smaller ball, or work to longer distances, higher trajectory throws. And this is going to constantly push that envelope and develop a greater catching skills instead of just letting the kid go out and maybe they're getting better by playing by themselves, but this will give us a constantly pushing the envelope and allowing them to get better at that skill without them even really realizing that they're getting better at the skill. We're just challenging them and offering different constraints that is going to allow them to be better at that skill. And then the physiological capability. So for speed at this age, they're going to start skipping and hopping so we can develop rhythm with skips and hops. And if you know about speed work and strength and conditioning, they still do a lot of that even at the collegiate setting. So speed itself has a lot to do with rhythm. And when they can start skipping and hopping at that young age, they should be developing coordination and intramuscular coordination and developing that rhythm that we can then transfer to speed as they get older. And then we can give them constraints and structured play to allow them to run fast, and like even just playing tag against their friends or telling them to go chase down a ball or something, just giving them opportunities to run fast and develop that speed skill at that age. And then, like I said, this is going to transfer to running and catching in football as they get older. So they're developing these catching skills. They're developing these speed skills. If they want to be a wide receiver as they get older and they develop those physiological capabilities, they can play football and play it at a high level because they'll have so many years of experience developing those skills. So this is kind of just a short model that I put together. So all of this is going to be described within each stage of the model. So we're going to give them examples of sports skills and strength and conditioning, the periodized program, and we're going to use those. So for example, sports skills, we're going to give specific drills and practice or training interventions, and we're going to give specific guidelines on how often they should be playing sports, what sports they should be playing, and how it's all going to transfer. And they're going to utilize that to be able to tell us, or we can tell them, or the athlete will be able to eventually use those skills to play specific sports, and they'll have a high level of visual motor integration, which I talked about is important for an athlete. And then for the strength and conditioning periodized program, we'll develop that physiology and so like things like speed, power, strength, mobility, and hypertrophy. And we'll also do that with weightlifting technique that will be important later on as we want to develop into a complete athlete. And the combination of these two is what's going to be important for our long-term athletic development model. It's the combination of sports skills and strength and conditioning. What skill, why that skill, how it's going to transfer, and how to actually develop these skills in each period of our long-term athletic development model. And I don't think that there's enough description of that in any of the long-term athletic development models that have been written before. So the importance of a plan. So this gives knowledge for parents on when to and how to develop their athlete. I think a lot of parents don't really have this knowledge. They're kind of guessing on what skills they can develop or just letting them go play. And they don't really have a strength and conditioning background and how to keep the athlete healthy. So this gives a knowledge for athletes to, or knowledge for parents to actually develop their athlete and keep them healthy. And like I said, no guesswork, and then consistency is key. You're not just going to become a great athlete when you roll out of bed one day. You have to consistently practice over a long-term period to really become an elite athlete. And then I think this is the main reason why I want to develop the long-term athletic development model, is that every young athlete should be given the opportunity to perfect their craft. And this gives parents, coaches, and athletes the foundation of how to do that. So nobody's going to miss out on an opportunity because of a lack of knowledge. So kind of the basis of why it's important to have a long-term athletic development model and why we need to develop these skills to be athletes. So motor learning and skill acquisition. All skills require practice, but once we practice them, it remains relatively permanent. So for example, riding a bike. We all started with training wheels. We all twist and turn, didn't really know how to ride a bike. But I haven't ridden a bike in months or a year, and I could jump on a bike and ride that bike easily because learning is relatively permanent. Once we have those skills, we can always go back to them and use them. So there's 3 stages to motor learning and skill acquisition. The 3 stages are cognitive, associative, and autonomous. So cognitive is when we really have to think about what we're doing. The first stage takes a lot of working memory, think about exactly how we're going to perform that skill. Might be a little uncoordinated, but that's okay. As we keep practicing, we'll move into the associative skill. So it relies a little bit less on working memory and will become a little more smooth until we move on to this autonomous stage where we're very fluent and we don't really have to think about how to perform that skill. It just becomes natural to us. And that's the stage that we want to get to with all these skills, and it starts with learning early. And we also need deliberate practice. You're not going to get better at skills just going through the motions. You have to focus on what skill you want to actually develop to get better at that skill. You're not going to get better just going through the motions. You have to have deliberate practice. And then a lot of people talk about the 10,000 hour rule. I think it's a good rule to have. I use it. I think it's mainly a basis of just an explanation of how many hours you're actually going to have to put in to really develop a skill set. It's going to take a long time, a lot of consistent practice to develop into an expert at a specific skill. I don't think you can just say it's 10,000 hours, but gives you a basis of, okay, I need to put in a lot of hours of work to get good at this skill. So central nervous system plasticity. Central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. Mainly what we're talking about in this sense is the brain. So plasticity is how we shape and form the brain based on our experiences and environment. So the main saying for this phase will be neurons that fire together, wire together. So we have neural circuitry in our brain. It's called neural exuberance. When we're first born, we don't really have specific connections. And then as we gain experience and we practice different skills, those neurons will start to fire together. And I'll explain how they do that next. So vertical columnar organization. So this is just, vertical columnar organization. So this is cell architecture with similar functions. So like we have different parts of our brain that are used for different skills. Like the visual skills is in the occipital lobe in the back of our brain, and we have the motor cortex where we actually go and move. And those are the vertical columnar organization where those specific skills are kind of based together, based on specific skills. So how does those neurons wire together? Well, they wire together through subcortical association and commissural projections. So the main thing we want to focus on is kind of like, for example, these projections send signals throughout different parts of the brain that allows those neurons to fire together and to wire together. So what they do is, like, for example, hand-eye coordination. We get a visual stimulus, realize what it is in the occipital lobe, and then we have to utilize the parietal lobe to come up with a way of how we're going to react to that, and then use the motor cortex to actually react to that stimulus and have an accurate coordinated response along with the cerebellum. So these projections send these signals throughout the brain through different hemispheres, from the cerebellum to the frontal lobe or the occipital lobe, vision. So it all works together, and these neurons fire together and wire together, and that's how we get better at a skill. So I kind of say it's like building a house. We build these basic neurons or neural circuitry, and then they continue to build off each other, and that's how we're going to develop those skills, like hand-eye coordination, catching a ball, and they all work on top of each other, and we're going to hone in on what circuitry we need. And then finally, we talk about critical periods of motor development. So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. So the critical periods of motor development is like when spastic neurons become more specified and start forming connections for the certain skill. So that accelerated rate of when a certain skill can be developed. The CNS needs to be mature enough for us to start developing a skill. So you can't run before you can walk. You have to start with walking, and then you can eventually run. And that's the same thing that goes with all these other skills. So, for example, reaching and grasping turns into hand-eye coordination that eventually leads to catching and throwing. So in this graph, you can kind of see how human brain development works. You start with these sensory pathways, vision, hearing, language, and reaching and grasping, and just kind of learning the environment. And then you moved on to these higher cognitive function tasks like catching and throwing. So you have to build the base of this neural circuitry before you can kind of work into those next skills. And in conclusion, so you want to challenge the brain and body to continue to build that neural circuitry, kind of constantly push the envelope. We need deliberate practice. We want to practice as much as possible. It doesn't have to be forced. It should be fun, but you should always be finding ways to practice those skills. Utilize this information to develop all skills. So you don't want to be one-sided or specific. You want to be a well-rounded athlete. You want to continue to build. So the Bukowski long-term athletic development model is combining strength and conditioning with those sports skills, how to actually develop those skills, and this will develop athletes into well-rounded athletes. And this will give kids every opportunity to reach their full potential, which is kind of the reason why this long-term athletic development model is so important. We want to give kids every opportunity to reach their full potential. Thank you.